Limbaugh died this week. You didn't have to be a fan or a listener to know he was a powerful and influential voice in the modern conservative movement. He had kicked around the radio for years, but burst onto the scene in the early 90s, right before the 1994 midterm elections dubbed the Republican Revolution. Limbaugh grew an enormous following, ditto heads as he called them. In fact, he wasn't afraid to call anyone anything.
Anywhere you turn this week, a radio station, a newspaper, or a TV show, someone was trying to put Rush Limbaugh's legacy into perspective.
He tapped into this audience that feels underrepresented in mainstream media.
That's Meghan McCain, who says she was not a Limbaugh fan, but she is right. Rush Limbaugh tapped into a base that felt unheard, harshly putting liberals and their ideology in place.
It makes her a slut, right? Makes her a prostitute.
Following that attack on a college student, advertisers started to bail. It was the only time Limbaugh ever apologized.
I again sincerely apologize to Ms. Fluke for using those two words to describe her.
Limbaugh's ratings and political influence soared with the birth of the Tea Party and the Republican Revolution of 1994. But his bread and butter was vitriol, often vicious, aimed at minorities, homosexuals, feminists. He was an early promoter of conspiracies, including that Barack Obama was not born in America. And he bought into the 2020 stolen election conspiracy, too.
He felt, like a lot of the people at your network feel, that the election was stolen.
He also paved the way for similar voices, including Sean Hannity.
Hey, Rush, how are you?
I am fabulous.
Unlike all the others, though, Rush had no guests, no phone calls, no scripts. It was all about the audience, some 46 million listeners.
It's that kind of connection that made him the most prominent broadcaster in right-wing radio for decades.
A voice likely to resonate for decades to come.
Dan, when I was at ABC in the early 1990s, Rush Limbaugh picked up on something I'd given in an interview to Variety magazine saying that the networks had a liberal agenda. And he was going on and on about it. And as somebody remarked at the time, it was akin to being embraced by a child molester. That's how the mainstream media really felt about him, and especially at the network level. He was right. He did tap into something. There wasn't an arrogance, a superiority, a leftish point of view. There still is to some degree, but he knew that there was something else out there, and he tapped in.
Well, what he tapped into was the sense of white resentment that's out there that later gave birth to the Fox News channel and then still later to the Trump phenomenon. They're all very much connected. You hate to speak ill of the dead, especially right after somebody has passed away. But in addition to being a racist, a misogynist, a homophobe, he trafficked in false conspiracies, such as the birther conspiracy about President Obama that you mentioned. And you can go all the way back to the conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton had something to do with the death of Vincent Foster. And I'm sure to a lot of our younger viewers, they're going to be saying, what are you even talking about? But this goes back decades at this point. And, rest in peace, Rush, but I don't think that his influence on the media or on politics was positive in any way.
I agree with Dan, and I don't mind speaking ill of the dead. I think that I don't agree very often with Sean Hannity, but Sean Hannity was right when he said that Rush Limbaugh was what led to Fox News. And as Dan pointed out, what led to Donald Trump. It all started with the end of the Fairness Doctrine, 1987. People didn't have to give both sides of an issue, and Rush Limbaugh took advantage of that, and he became a star because of it. People say he was entertaining, he was smart, he espoused conservative values. What I heard when I listened to Rush Limbaugh was a mean-spirited, divisive man who trafficked in conspiracy theories and all sorts of other things so he could get his ditto heads who couldn't think for themselves to agree with him. I look at him as John the Forerunner to Donald Trump and the cult of Donald Trump, and one of the most corrosive figures of the past 25 years. One of the things that was particularly galling to me about him was that he was especially, there was a hypocrisy about him when it came to talking about people who had health challenges. He made fun of Michael J. Fox for his Parkinson's. He made fun of Greta Thunberg because she had Asperger's. And yet, as was pointed out by one of my students today who has hearing impairment, he had serious hearing impairment. He had 2 cochlear implants, and he still couldn't hear well. And he had to have somebody transcribe in real time his callers so he could understand them. Yet he had no empathy for people like that. And that hypocrisy, I thought, was what was one of the most galling things to me about Rush Limbaugh.
I think it's worth noting that a lot of the things that people on both sides of the aisle currently hate about the mainstream media, Rush Limbaugh not only innovated but embraced. Hyper-partisanship, blatant bias, using opinion instead of reporting, conspiracy theories, fear-mongering. All of that was part of his bread and butter. It was his trademark. So, yes, I think he changed the media landscape forever. I don't think he changed it for the better. I do think there's an opening now. Remember, there's a lot of people who were loyal listeners, 46 million listeners. That's not below the radar. That is mainstream. He created a new part of the mainstream as he was vilifying the rest of it.
I really believe, though, Dan, I mean, you guys, I think part of it was an act. I honestly believe it. I don't know how much of that stuff he believed himself. He was cashing in on it, and he was right. I mean, you guys. I mean, you're all right about the criticisms of him, but he was right about a visceral sense he had about the underbelly of America, that no one was speaking to them. Certainly nobody in the mainstream press. Nobody in, and that's what happened with the 2016 election too. No one was speaking to them.
Well, look,
no, that's absolutely right.
This guy understood his generation. We around here in blue Massachusetts tend to think of the baby boomers as, all liberals and Woodstock and all that stuff. Well, fully half our generation are not liberals. And he tapped into them nationally in a way that hadn't been done before. There'd been prototypes like Joe Pine out in L.A. telling hippies to go gargle with glass and that kind of thing. But Limbaugh drew from an era of rising cultural snarkiness, Saturday Night Live, David Letterman, that was associated with the boomers, and brought it into right-wing talk radio for the first time. He created a family atmosphere, a sense of belonging for his listeners. The ditto heads, Emily, would gather in those rush rooms to have lunch every day. Remember that? Yep. So, and politically, as others have said, he laid the groundwork for Palin, Trump, and what was to come. He may be gone, but his legacy lives on big time.